Hi everybody, I'm Jack Reda. I'm the designer of Firefly and Misbehavin, which is a factions deck building game. What does that mean? Well, there's 4 different factions in the game that you can play, so it's a 2 to 4 player game. It's deck building, which means you're going to start with a deck of 10 cards, but you will, over the course of the game, acquire more cards that you can add to your deck. And what sets this apart a little bit from a lot of other deck building games is that throughout the game you are also playing cards to what is known as your tableau, or a player board, which gets the cards out of your deck, and you can leave them in the tableau for the whole game if you like. And there are also cards that you acquire that once you play them, they return to what's known as the supply. So different cards don't stay in your deck for very long. It's not unusual to end a game of Misbehavin with a deck that's actually smaller than the one that you start with. I like to try to end with only a 5-card deck. So the different factions that you can play in Misbehavin are straight out of the Firefly verse. So you have the Alliance, you have Badger's group and Eve's Down, you have Niska's group, and then you have Serenity. And each of these factions starts with a unique 10-card deck. In this video, we're going to focus on Serenity. So Serenity is in gold there, sort of yellowish gold. And we're going to take a look at what's in their deck, the abilities of all those cards, and some strategy tips for how to play Serenity. So their starting deck of 10 cards has a couple of items, some assets, and 2 characters. So we're going to start with the items. The first thing that we have is the standard Radion Accelerator Core there. So first thing that you'll notice is that actually it has a prerequisite, and that symbol is for ship. That means that in order to play this card, you need to have a ship in your tableau. We'll get to the ship here in just a minute. So this card, to play this, you need to have the ship in play before it. It has no influence. It only has 1 power, and it only has a 2 defense. So not an easy card to protect, but is anyone going to go after it? Probably not. Now, its ability is you trigger this card and any card with the ship attribute in your tableau without effect. So again, triggering is you just turning the card sideways. Now, sometimes you're doing that for an ability, but in this case, you're triggering this, and it doesn't cost an activation. You can just do it. You trigger your ship as well, and then you are able to draw a card. So when you are in a situation where you maybe need another card, or you don't have one that you want in your hand, but it's hopefully at the top of your deck, you have a recourse where you can freely draw that card. So can be a useful ability. The next item we have is your brown coat. No influence, no power, and only a 2 defense. But it does have a decent ability that does cost an activation. And it has that little lightning bolt there that lets you know that you have to spend your activation to use that ability. So you have an activation at the start of your turn that you can use in a variety of ways. One is to trigger a card for its effect, and another one that you commonly do would just be to play a card down to your tableau. And when you do play a card, you can trigger it for its an effect as part of the same activation. So this one, you're doing it just to draw a card. So again, another card that lets you get a card. It's in their deck. The next card they have is the Frontier Model B. Another 2 defense. It's got 2 power and can be used in a fight. So that is one of their fight cards. 1 influence. So everybody's starting deck has 6 influence spread out among their cards. Alliance a little bit differently, but that's covered in another video. So this is the first card with influence in their deck, 1 influence. It has an ability that does not require an activation, no lightning bolt. Discard this card from your hand to cancel a deal or a steal. So all of the decks, except for the Alliance deck, has a card in it that can cancel deals. And I'll talk a little bit about more about deals a little bit later. But deals are ways for you to acquire cards, very much like a recruitment action. And so if this is in your hand and somebody else is making a deal, you can cancel it. Or if somebody's trying to steal credits from you, you can cancel that as well. You could cancel it if they're trying to steal from somebody else. You could cancel it. So this is one of those cards that you're going to probably want to leave in your deck for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is its ability. It only works if it's coming from your hand. But it's always good to have some fight cards with power in your deck, especially towards the second half of the game, because you are going to need fight cards to defend yourself when you go for the win. Other players are going to try to prevent you from winning, and they're going to do that by picking a fight. The other thing is, of course, it only has a 2 defense. So the cost of cards is also their defense, which is why it's behind a little shield there. So this is not an easy card to defend because it only has 2 defense. That's pretty low. All right, now we're getting into their assets. First asset that they have in their deck is their hidey hole. Also with the 2 defense, 1 power, no influence. But the hidey hole has a free ability. Discard this card from your tableau, then discard a targeted card in your command area to evade a fight. So here's what that means. When somebody is picking a fight with you, they are going to be targeting one of the cards that you have in your tableau. And the tableau has 2 areas. So the top row is your asset area, and any card that's an asset that you want to play has got to go up there. As you can see, Serenity only has slots for 4 assets, but they do have slots for 5 cards in their command area. That's the bottom row here, which can be up to 4 characters or up to 4 items or a mixture thereof. So if you've got a character or an item in your tableau and you've got your hidey hole, which is an asset, and somebody is targeting one of your characters or your items, you can discard that targeted card and this one to evade the fight. And evade the fight just means the fight's over and there's no winner. So it's a great way to get out of that. And you'll be giving up 1 power from your tableau from this card and whatever power your targeted card has. So you want to make sure that if you're using that ability to stop somebody from stopping you from winning the game, that you still have enough power left over when you take into account those cards are going away. Sometimes, you know, if somebody's trying to target one of your good cards in your command area, it doesn't matter if you're going for the win or not. You don't want them to take that card. So the next card that we have is the common area. Again, low defense, 1 power, 1 influence. So this is another one of your influence cards. This one does have an ability that requires an activation. Reveal the top 2 cards from your deck, discard 1 and add the other to your hand. So again, another card that lets you draw from your deck to get to something that you might need or want. Now they've got 2 more assets. They're the same. They got different art there, but it's you can't take the sky away from me. So not every card in the game is a physical thing. The assets are made up of people and items and ships and locations and concepts as well. So that's what this case is. So both of these, only 1 defense. So this is not a card that's going to be easy to defend, but it's also not a card that many players are necessarily going to want. Does have 2 power, no influence. Its ability is you can discard this card from your tableau to gain 1 activation. And then you're going to add the black to your recycle pile. So what is the black? The black is a supply card. It's not one that you can buy, and it's what I call a garbage card, because as you can see, it has no influence, no power, and you can't play it into your tableau. There's no shield. And its ability, if you want to call it that, is we return it to the supply board when you play a location to your tableau or trigger one. So the idea is that, you know, you're floating around in space. The only way to get rid of this is to go somewhere. You have to go to a planet, or you have to trigger the effect of a planet that's in your tableau, and then you can return this to the supply if it's in your hand at that time. So this is a card that's very hard to get rid of, and it doesn't do anything. You don't want to be in a situation where you're drawing your cards at the end of your turn and 1 or more of them are the black, because they don't do anything. They're just garbage. So if you want to use the you can't take the sky away from me, you're going to get an activation. So it's free. This doesn't cost anything to play it. Get an extra activation on your turn, but you're going to be adding the black to your recycle pile. So now it's in your deck. So that's the trade-off. You got to decide how big of a deal is it. Is it important enough to have that extra activation? And you can do this, you know, anything that doesn't have a lightning bolt, you can do it on someone else's turn. So there may be a reason why you need that activation. If you're in a fight and you have an ability like one of these ones that lets you draw cards, now you've got a way to get that, as long as this card itself isn't targeted, which it probably isn't. This brings us to the last asset that they have, which is Serenity. So Serenity has a 6 defense. So this is going to be hard for anybody to take away. 3 power, so it's great to have in your tableau. It is one of your influence. It does have an ability. It's a free ability. Trigger this card to retain a character you used in a fight. So retain means after the end of, retain is done at the end of a fight or end of a deal. But in this case, for a fight, characters in your display area, once that fight is over, those are going to return to your recycle pile. So even if, it doesn't matter if they came from your hand or if they were in your tableau and you moved them to the display area, they're going to go into the recycle at the end of that fight. But if you have Serenity in your tableau and then you trigger it just by turning it sideways, then you can put that character back into your hand, which you may need them if you're in another fight before your turn happens. Or let's say that it's a character that has influence that you were hoping to use in to make a deal or for your recruitment when your turn comes around, or they may have some other ability, as we'll see when we look at the next two cards. So Serenity, and you can see it's got the little ship attribute there. So we had that other card, the Accelerator Core, that has that prerequisite. So Serenity is a good card. The other reason that it's good to have a ship in play is it lets you play most of the maneuver cards. So there's a number of maneuver cards that are supply cards. So there's a stack of them. There'll be 5 of them. Here's one, for instance, Crazy Ivan. So if Crazy Ivan is in the game, it'll be in the supply, and there will be 5 of them. And you can see it has a prerequisite as well. You have to have a ship in play in order to play this. The leaf there shows you that it's a maneuver. And that's the cost. It costs 3 to get it. It has 3 power, which most of the time is not going to matter, but it could matter for something, which I'll explain in a moment. But it has some interesting abilities. And playing maneuvers doesn't cost an activation. You can just do them. So if you've got a ship in your tableau, you can just play the Crazy Ivan to your display area to reset a card. So anytime you trigger a card, you're going to turn it sideways. Reset means you've turned it upright. That means you can use that card for its ability. You can bring it into a fight if it has the fight attribute. You can use it for its influence. Or you can discard a random card from your hand to discard any card in a display area during a fight. What does that mean? Well, that means you can say, all right, I'm doing a Crazy Ivan, and, let's discard one of my cards at random from my hand because I'm in the fight right now, and now I'm able to specifically choose a card in my opponent's display area in that fight. Maybe somebody who's got 2 or 3 power, like Jane or Jubal Early, and now they are out of the fight. They are discarded, and that may be all I need to get out of that fight. The other important thing to know about maneuvers is that if you have verse tokens, you can replay the effect, any effect on that maneuver before it returns to the supply deck. Remember, this is a supply card. So once you resolve its effect fully, it doesn't return to your discard area recycle pile. It goes back to the supply board. You would have to buy that card again in order to add it to your deck. But verse tokens let you reactivate, not activate, I don't want to use that word, but reuse one of its effects. And it could be a different effect. So you could play this and do the first thing, which is reset a card and then spend verse tokens to do another effect. So that can be super handy. But you need to have a ship. All of the maneuvers except for one have a prerequisite of you needing a ship in play in order to play that card. And we're going to come back to that here in just a minute. We're down to the last 2 cards of the 2 characters. We've got Zoe. So Zoe has a defense of 4. She's got the deal attribute, so you can use her to make a deal. She's got fight and 2 power that she can bring into a fight. She's got 1 influence, and she's got an ability. It costs an activation. Draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card from your hand. Another card that lets you draw cards. And here you're drawing 2 and then discarding 1 from your hand. It doesn't have to be one of the ones that you drew. It can be something else, like you can't take this guy away from me, or some other card that you don't really need at that time. So she's got a very useful ability. And then finally, we have Mal. So Mal, a 5 defense. He's got 2 power and 2 influence. He can make deals, and he can be in a fight as well. And his ability is cost an activation, discard a card from your hand to gain credits equal to its power. So that is any card in your hand, and you're looking at the power. So if he were to discard Zoe from his hand, he would get 2 credits for that. But let's say that you've got Crazy Ivan in your hand. Well, you can discard this maneuver, and it doesn't return to the supply. You haven't played it, you've discarded it, and that would get you 3 credits. Or even better, if you've got a Misbehave, and that will give you 4 credits for discarding that. And Misbehave is one of the best cards for Serenity to get into their deck for a number of reasons. I'll get to that after I talk a little bit more about verse tokens. So this card here shows how Serenity is going to earn a verse token, and down here how to spend them and what they can do. And each faction has a card like this. It's not the same. Everyone earns them in a different way, and they can spend them in different ways as well. And the back has some references for different actions, how to do activations, and stuff about fights. So we're talking about how to earn a verse token. On your turn, you can earn 1 verse token in this manner. And here's what the Serenity verse tokens look like. So pretty unsurprising. You start the game with 1. On your turn, you can earn another 1. You also can get them for winning fights. And there's a couple other effects in the game that can get you verse. But by and large, you're going to be doing it because of this. So Serenity needs to have at least 1 untriggered character in their tableau. So Mal or Zoe or some other character that they've added to their deck. They need to be in the tableau, and they need to be untriggered. So upright and ready to go. And then they need to discard untriggered cards from hand or the tableau with a total of at least 4 power. So that's cards in the tableau that are not triggered. So let's say that you've got the Frontier Model B. It's an item. You've got it here. Probably put it over here because that's a character slot. So you say, all right, this is an item. I'm going to discard that. That's for 2 power. Or a card from my hand. And all cards in hand are considered untriggered until they've gotten to 4 power. Then they've earned that verse token. So getting back to the Misbehave, as you will recall, 4 power. So with 1 card, they can discard that and earn a verse token. That is super useful. If you will remember, You Can't Take the Sky Away From Me, those both have 2 power. So those are 2 cards that you're always going to be happy to discard in order to pick up another verse token. And there's plenty of other ways that you can get to 4 power, but it's best to discard cards without influence because you're going to want that influence for recruitment. So let's talk about how they can spend their verse tokens. Well, it costs them 2 to gain another activation, and that's incredibly useful if you want to be able to play multiple cards on your turn, or to play a card and then pick a fight, or make a deal and pick a fight, or pick 2 fights. If you've got 4 verse tokens, you could discard 4 of them for 2 more activations. So you can do these. You can spend verse tokens as many times as you want on your turn, provided you have enough verse tokens to do it. You can also spend verse tokens when you are in a fight. So on another player's turn, if you're in that fight, you can spend verse tokens to gain an activation or to draw a card. That costs 2. And then they can spend 2 to gain another recruitment. That lets them add another card to their deck. So sometimes if they've got a lot of influence, you can't break that up. If you've got 6 influence in your hand, you can't say, all right, well, I'm going to spend 4 of it for this and 2 of it for that. You only have 1 recruitment action you can do on your turn unless you have an effect that gives you another one. So, and then of course, all the factions can spend verse tokens to retain cards. We talked about that. That's after a fight or a deal. Those cards, supply cards, always return to the supply. Can't do anything about that. So if you have a Misbehave that you've used in a fight, that's going to go back to the supply. But all of your characters, items, and assets, if those are in your display area, they'll go to the recycle unless you retain them. It costs you 1 token per card to put it back into your hand. And then replay maneuvers. We talked about that already as well. So having those verse tokens is incredibly useful. There's another way that you can use verse tokens as well. So certain cards in the market, and the market's going to be 3 decks that are composed of cards from the border, the rim, and the core. And certain cards that show up will have their own, it's not a prerequisite in this case, but it's a potential discount. So that is the Serenity symbol in the corner there for Kaylee Fry. And that means that she is predisposed to wanting to be part of Serenity's crew. She wants to be in that deck, which means you can spend verse tokens to discount her cost. Essentially, you're using verse tokens as influence. So that's whether you're doing a recruitment action or making a deal. If you've got 2 verse tokens and you only have 3 influence, you can spend those 2 verse tokens, and now you can spend the 3 influence to get Kaylee and add her to your deck. So having those verse tokens, really useful. Wash also wants to be part of Serenity. That's where Zoe is. You know he wants to be there. And what I think is kind of a funny little twist there, you have Inara, but she has 2. And what does that mean? That means that it costs 2 verse tokens for a discount of 1. So if you've got 5 influence and 2 verse tokens, you can discount Inara. So she wants to be part of Serenity, but she does want to give Mal some grief about it. That's kind of how I look at it. So there are other cards in there. You'll note that Jane does not have Serenity's icon. You can recruit him and add him to your deck, but I don't know, he's kind of more of a rogue. He goes to where he'll get paid, and that kind of factors into one of his abilities as well. So having the verse tokens it's going to be important for all factions in the game because those verse tokens are so versatile. No pun intended. There's a lot of uses you can get out of them, getting really good cards in the maneuvers. Now, Serenity is one of only 2 factions that starts with a ship in their starting 10 cards. The Alliance has the Tohoku-class cruiser. Eve's Down and Niska don't have ships. So I like to take advantage of the fact that I've got Serenity in my starting deck when I'm playing the Serenity faction. And I pick up maneuvers. Those maneuvers, like I showed you the Crazy Ivan, there's also Full Burn, and there's the Dart. The Dart is another one. Costs 3, it's got 2 power. It can be used in a fight, and that is important. So you could say, all right, I'm in a fight, I'm going to play the Dart to add 2 power to that fight. But it also has abilities that you can use. One is to trigger a card in any player's tableau for no effect. So why would you want to do that? Well, if you are in a fight, or even if you're not yet in a fight but are thinking about it, you could play the Dart to trigger a card in their tableau that they could potentially bring into the fight. So any cards with the fight attribute that they've got in their tableau, they could move into the display area if they needed to add that card's power to their fight. As long as the card has that fight attribute, it can be brought into the fight and it's not triggered. So here you are preemptively triggering it, or you're triggering it right when they're about to use it. Or you can just play this to gain an activation. Remember, playing maneuvers doesn't cost an activation. So if you've got the Dart and you've got a ship in your tableau like Serenity, you can just play this and say, all right, great, I've got another maneuver, or not another activation. And I'm spending a verse token to use that maneuver again. So now I've got another activation. And again, you can split those things up. So you could say, all right, I'm gonna play this card to trigger a card in your tableau. Then I'm gonna spend a verse token to gain an activation. And then I'm gonna spend another verse token to gain another activation. And then the card will return to the supply after I've spent all the verse tokens that I want. So as you can imagine, that can be amazingly powerful. I can't overstate how powerful maneuvers can be. So get some maneuvers into your deck if you have a ship in play. They're good to have. The Dart is really good to have for multiple reasons because, again, as I mentioned, you want to have cards with the fight attribute in your deck when you're going for the win. If you've got several of these in your hand, you could use them for their power in a fight. You can also use them for their abilities to just literally outmaneuver your opponent. So that is one of the most important elements to Serenity's approach in trying to win the game. You're going to want to make deals so that you can get some powerful assets like different planets for their power to get those into your tableau. And remember, the tableau for Serenity only has slots for 4 assets. And because you've got the hidey hole that you can use to get out of prevent one of your characters or items from being nabbed, you want to make sure that your assets have enough defense that they are very difficult to take away. And preferably when you are playing cards in order to fight and defend, those cards are coming from your hand and not from your tableau. Because every card that you move out of your tableau to your display area in a fight is a card that's no longer in your tableau. Its power is not adding to your win conditions. Now, some of the episode cards, which I'm going to cover in another video, you're not so much worried about having power in your tableau. But for the standard victory condition, you need to have a certain amount of power depending on the player count. So you can see right there, In a 4-player game, you want to start your turn with 11 power. 2-player game is 13 power. So once you're getting to the point where you want to be able to throw down a lot of power, having those extra activations is good. Using your verse tokens to get them, that's the key to doing it. So making a deal. You've got 2 cards that can make a deal, and they both have influence as well. So Mal and Zoe both have, Mal's got 2 influence, Zoe's got 1. When you're making a deal, you get to use the influence on the card that starts the deal. So only the first card that you play to your display area needs to have the deal attribute. After that, you're just adding influence. So you can say, yes, I'm going to throw Serenity in there as well for another influence. But the real strength of making a deal is it lets you spend credits. You got these credit tokens. You start the game with 1. You've seen that Mal's ability lets you get more, and there are other ways that you can pick up credits. You can use like a shiny card to get credits. And using credits to make a deal, very useful. Just keep in mind, there are ways to cancel a deal. The recruitment action, which is also a way that you're adding a card to your deck, can't be canceled by any means. But, as I mentioned, you have the Frontier Model B that can cancel someone else's deal. Niska has a card that can cancel a deal. I believe it's Crow. And Eve's Down has a card. And anybody with a Misbehave has the ability to cancel a deal. Another reason why you would want to have some Misbehaves, because it lets you cancel an effect that cancels a deal. So you got, I'm canceling your deal, and I'm misbehaving to cancel your cancel, and I'm misbehaving as well to cancel the cancel of my cancel. So you can have that happen, but you've got to have those cards to do that. So one of the big strengths is that a lot of the cards in Serenity's deck let you draw cards. So you want to make sure that your deck has cards in it that are good to draw. In the early part of the game, that's going to be cards that have influence. And in the later part of the game, it's going to be cards that have fight. Some cards will have useful abilities. There are plenty of cards in there that are useful to use in a fight, even if they're not in the fight per se, but they have an ability that can affect it. Like they can cause somebody's cards in a display area to be removed from the display area or canceled in some other way. So keep your eye out in the market for those cards. Use deals, use recruitments smartly to get those cards into your deck, because if they're not in your hand, you have a few ways that you can potentially get to those cards. It helps if you've got verse tokens. So pick up some cards that have enough power that you can discard them. And like I said, this is your best friend. If you're Serenity, it's 4 power you can use in a fight. You can discard these to earn verse tokens. You can cancel the effect of somebody trying to cancel your deal. Yeah, you can discard these with Mal's ability in order to pick up 4 credits. So it's a great card to get. It's not always going to be in the game. Keep that in mind, because your supply sets can be switched around. And sometimes you will draft which supply sets to be in there. And if you're Serenity, you want to try to draft Misbehave if you can. Certainly it can be used against you, but that's a great card to go after because it's a real good utility card for Serenity. So that's basically it. You're ready to fight, and you should pick up more cards that let you do it, especially the Misbehave cards. Serenity is a fun faction to play, and it's got some good tricks up its sleeve if you are able to leverage them correctly. So that's it for this particular video. Other videos are going to talk about the supply sets, the different cards in the different markets, and some of the episodes and reavers. So there's plenty more to talk about. Pick up Misbehavin. It is now available from Gale Force 9. And if you've got questions about it, let me know. I'm looking forward to hearing from people. Thanks.